Welcome. We're glad you could join us for our second podcast. We're going to keep doing these on Mondays, following up our sermons. And so to start, we would love it if you would hit the subscribe or the like button on our channel. If you do subscribe, then you'll get access to all of our videos, not just these, but any video content that we produce here at Messiah. And it'll all go there to our YouTube channel. And so I'd love to have you there. Also, this is a follow-up podcast to our Sunday messages, so it kind of helps if you heard that message, don't you think?
It does.
Excellent. We will make sure you can find that. If you're looking for the Sunday sermons, we cut those out of our broadcast and then post those in a couple different places. You can find an audio podcast of our sermons on the Messiah app, which is available on all of your app stores. Also, you can find both the video and audio podcast on our Messiah website. And if you also go to that Messiah website, you can find the full worship service, along with finding it on Apple TV or Roku. We have a channel for both Apple TV and Roku. I think I covered all the bases.
You did. As soon as you hit record, I have a tickle in my throat. I'm trying not to cough into the microphone.
Clear it out.
Excuse me.
That's right.
Excuse me.
Today's podcast sponsored by
any kind of medicine.
Any kind of cough drop. Eventually, we'll get the sponsors. Then we'll have to wear the patches and all that. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast,
yes, call Vic or Andy.
Get in touch with us. But right now, we're going to turn our attention to this Sunday's message, which I actually got a little preview of Saturday because I was in for the operetta, and Pastor Dustin sent his slides in, and I put them in the service for us. We use a program called Pro Presenter. 35 slides, Pastor Dustin, and you were just teasing Pastor John last week about going a little long, and 35 slides.
And so a little bit of just behind the scenes stuff that people don't realize, but that makes some of our staff nervous, right? So
not at all.
Scott pays close attention to timing the sermons. And what's our sweet spot we're trying to get
You've
to?
told me 20 slides, so you were plus 15 this week.
Well, 20 minutes,
20 minutes. 20 minutes is our sweet spot.
A minute per slide.
And not that longer sermons are bad. I actually this morning on my treadmill just listened to a 40-minute sermon, and it was a great message. But when we're trying to do 3 services on a Sunday and we're dealing with parking and donuts, and which is in my realm, we kind of keep an eye on that.
But we came in, we were a minute or 2 minutes past
the total service time was great. Yeah. So it was definitely worth you spending a few extra minutes.
I've told people before that you can listen to a 15-minute sermon that feels like 45 minutes.
And there.
Or you can listen to a 45-minute sermon that feels like 15 minutes. So which would you rather have?
So we'll start including polls on this podcast where you can vote. What did this one feel like?
That's great.
Well, we were under 40 minutes. So
we were. Hebrews 3.
All right, Hebrews 3. Going through the book of Hebrews, loving Hebrews. There's so much there, though. So I think we've preached on, 4 verses the first week, 1 verse the second week, and I think I got 6 verses. So we're picking up the pace.
That was good.
A little bit. Keying in on that word, therefore, that appears again and again. In fact, I think, Andy, it's at the start of chapter 4 again.
Wow.
Just reminding us, we need to pay close attention to what's come before this. And that's really what I focused on in the message is verse 3, therefore, holy brothers, sisters, you who share in this heavenly calling, consider Jesus. And so that whole idea of what it means to consider Jesus, to think about Jesus, to fix your thoughts on Jesus. And I had shared then, if anybody knows what the importance of fixing their eyes on Jesus was Peter. And I used that as an example in the sermon. And the reason I bring this up again, because there's something I didn't get to touch on, starting in verse 7. I didn't really get into this. And I know, Andy, you're probably going to spend a little time with this on the rest side of things. But there's that word again, therefore, as the Holy Spirit says today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And that was something I had planned on, but again, I already had 35 slides, so we had to cut some things out. So I didn't really go into the hardening of the hearts. But I was thinking about this morning, and I think Peter still serves as an example of this. Peter and Judas. So if you think about in the upper room, Jesus, again with his disciples, before going to the cross, and Jesus announces, look, one of you at the table is going to betray me. And we come to know that's Judas. Plans are already in motion. But he also tells Peter, you're going to deny me. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And in a sense, all the disciples are betraying Jesus, denying Jesus as they all leave him in his time of need. But then there's this difference between how things work out for Peter and Judas. And Judas who ends up taking his own life. But what I'm reminded of is, when Peter denies Jesus 3 times and the rooster crows, right? There's a weeping, there's a sadness. I think he realizes what he's done. Judas, though, he returns the money too. But there's no forgiveness that is offered to him by the religious leaders. And the difference then comes, Judas turns inward. Where on Easter, right, on Sunday, Peter, who's still remorseful, when he gets the news that the tomb is empty, he runs. He runs to the empty tomb. And so I think his focus, right, he's still thinking of Jesus. Where Judas turns inward, and I think that's what happens sometimes. There's this hardening of the heart that starts to take place. And so the focus that we really talked about, especially confirming 30 of our confirmands, was the importance of to consider Jesus, to think about Jesus, to keep your eyes focused on Jesus, to know Jesus, because in knowing him, believing in him, that's where we have life. And so that belief, that faith, and that's the word that we use, that faith is a gift from God, and the importance of living life where we are faithful. And then the one thing that I wanted everyone to know is that even when we're faithless, the scriptures remind us that God is faithful. And that even when maybe we take our eyes off of Jesus, he never takes his eyes off of us. And even if we're not thinking about him or paying attention, he's always thinking about, always paying attention to us. And where we might lose our grip, he never lets go of us. And so to know how important it is for us to consider Jesus, but even greater than that is his consideration of us.
When you talk about that hardening of the heart, it's just, well, and even as you mentioned, Judas, my wife and I are just now watching The Chosen, and just a few days ago, we saw the episode where he's like, hey, I'm Judas. And I'm like, oh, dude. I just wanted to give him a hug and just say, don't do it.
You're like, you have no idea.
I know.
Happen.
I'm like, oh, this guy. Every time I see him now. But in today's society, when we hear such angry voices that are against what we believe and totally opposite of what we believe, and it's easy to start going down that road of hating those people, or being angry at those people, or just wanting to shake them and straighten them out. And when you said, Peter, run back to Jesus, because in Jesus is where your heart is going to soften again, and you're going to give up all of that anger and that hatred and not let it sit and harden your heart. Because, you look through the Bible and you think this happened often to people throughout the Bible, and it can happen to us if we don't keep our focus back on Jesus. Well,
and so again, you think about this story that Jesus tells of the prodigal son, and it's a story he's telling, it's a parable he's teaching, but there's a lesson for all of that, and we all sometimes are like that son, like, all right, I'm just taking what I want, and I'm going to go live my life however I want to live it, and then realizing, like, maybe I made a mistake here. And then that son returning home and just hoping some way that his father will welcome him back. And then in the story that Jesus is telling, wanting us to know, because that's what Jesus is saying. Look, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you've listened to me, you listen to the Father. And what he shows us in that story is the Father's heart, and the Father who never stopped watching. and the father who then runs to his son and welcomes him back. And so I know, Andy, you're probably going to be picking up on the rest theme of this, and that's
super relevant to what you guys are talking about, especially the prodigal son. And what we see is in the text is when you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. And so I can also take that as when you hear his voice, that's what leads to that rest, being with him, hearing that voice. And I love how you talk about looking inward versus looking outward. And there's certainly those times, we hear these words about self-care and, take care of yourself and rhythms and those things. And those are so important. But if you don't rest with God and have him as a part of that process, you can stay inward. And I know myself, I've noticed when I get, in feelings and my head's going crazy and I'm feeling anxiety or whatever it is, the more I look inward, it seems to be the worse it gets. Because I start to see, wow, I'm exhausted. I can't do this, whatever those bad things we tend to tell ourselves. But when I look outward, I look up to God and I talk to him and I ask him to strengthen me and preserve me. And when I'm in the church family and we encourage each other and strengthen one another, and I'm with my family or even serving, like if I ever get where I'm, thinking too much or I'm looking inward too much, I go, I need to do something. I need to, even just working in the yard, or I want to go do something at church. I feel better because I think Satan really wants us to look inward. I think that's kind of his part. And also he wants us to not rest, and certainly not rest with the Father. And so I think you're really spot on with that. A big part of that faithfulness is knowing and experiencing God, because he is faithful always, and he is always there, and he will fill you up.
And I love how you said that rest comes from hearing his voice, hearing his word. I was late coming over here. Scott, you had texted me.
I did.
Where are you at? And I said I was looking at the baby. So Bethany, our children's director, is back after being on maternity leave, and she has her new little one, Daniel, here with her. But what it made me think of is what I was just watching is she's trying to get him to fall asleep, right? Take a little nap, get some rest.
She was trying about an hour and a half ago.
Okay, an hour and a half
by
ago.
too. So,
but he was just focused on her, and she was talking like he was hearing the voice, right? The voice of his mom, and he was just focused on that and smiling. And I'm thinking of that image of us, right? Just hearing the voice of God and just being in that complete place of rest and resting in him and resting in his faithfulness. And Jesus, who says, come to me, right? If you're burdened, if you're heavy laden, if things are working against you, come to me and find rest.
Yeah, and that ties so much to, I think a lot of, Deuteronomy 30 of choosing life and death. And certainly God is working on us all the time, but there also involves a choice of being in his word or coming to church or whatever those things are. And I do look at it as, that Father looking down on us and wanting us to have that transformative word in our hands and be in community. And it's just so interesting to me how we tend to do that rebellion. We go off on our own. If things are going challenging or we're overwhelmed, we try to fix it immediately, and excuse me, we want that idol of control. And frankly, that's probably one of the biggest roadblocks to rest. If you're going, wow, I can't see the end of this busyness, you're going to keep trying and trying by your own strength, and it's going to run out. But the good news is, when that happens, God is always right there. And he reminds us, hey, I can give you strength, but let's rest so that you can have that strength.
So it's interesting to think of that in terms of Hebrews. Again, it's not a letter, it's a sermon. And the preacher, he's preaching to the Hebrews, these Jewish Christians who are torn between this new life of following Jesus and thinking, I don't know, we're being persecuted for this. Is it really worth it? And thinking about maybe we just need to return to our old ways. But you think about, for so much of that culture and those people, it was focused on do this, don't do this. And where's the rest in that? Like, it is exhausting.
right.
And I think part of the proclaimer of Hebrews is saying, look, I want you to consider Jesus and what he's done and his grace and that's what Christianity is, and why it's so different than any other religion of the world, is that it's not about what we do or don't do, but what Christ has done, and we can just rest in that, in his finished work. And ultimately then to live the life that God made us for, but not because we have to, but because we get to. That new identity being formed in us, out of that then flows this obedience. As he's been faithful to us, that was the kind of the key word in chapter 3. As he's been faithful to us, we get to be faithful to him.
And that's a perfect segue, because these are people that know Sabbath. They keep the Sabbath with regularity. So they know an idea of rest, at least on this earth. But I think the rest that actually is being talked about here and gets more into detail, as I'll be unpacking in chapter 4, is we're talking about eternal rest. That eternal rest that now everything is different, right? Before it was you do these things and please the Father, and that was their focus. But now it's, no, because the high priest has come. Because everything has changed. The curtain is torn. You now can rest knowing not only he's with you here on earth, but your joy, your peace, your rest on earth now comes from the fact that he is preparing a place for you, and you will have eternal rest.
Eternal rest. I like that. Yeah.
So no spoilers, but you were telling me.
I gave a lot of good stuff there.
No, you were telling me you're still seeing how the Spirit is leading you towards this coming message on Sunday, which you're preaching. And
I have 3 outlines.
3.
They're very similar, but different directions. We'll decide. The Holy Spirit will guide me there.
All right. You want to say anything more about those 3? Or are you going to keep them secret? Or
no. I was thinking about giving maybe a great illustration of what it's like to coach 7-year-olds in flag football.
That would be something.
I said I get a little bit of what God sees when he prepares his people. I prepare my 7-year-olds, and then I send them out. I send them on the field hoping they obey, and they don't very often.
No, probably lasts about 5 seconds.
Guys, I know what's best for you. Here it is. Just do this, and everything will go well with you. Okay, I'm going to need to send Jesus.
I've definitely, becoming a dad, have grown in my relationship with God to understand unconditional love, and how sometimes maybe God's a little frustrated with us, but from a place of love.
Yes.
Why don't you get this? So,
the only difference is he knows. He knows we're going to make those mistakes. I really still think my 7-year-olds are going to do it right. I don't know what's wrong with me. Hopeful.
Awesome.
Hopeful.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me today. Again, if you want to subscribe to our channel, you will get notifications all the time of when we release new videos. And we'll be back again next Monday.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Guys.